The morning of December 12th, 1910, broke over New York City with a crisp, wintry clarity. It was a Monday, and the holiday season was beginning to quicken the pulse of Manhattan. The air was cold, but the sun was bright, casting long shadows down the sophisticated corridors of Fifth Avenue. To the casual observer, the city was a machine of commerce and celebration. But for the Arnold family of East 79th Street, this date would mark the dividing line between a life of structured privilege and an existence defined by unanswerable questions. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold was 25 years old on that day. She was a woman who seemingly possessed everything the era promised to those of her station. She was an heiress to a perfume importer's fortune, a graduate of Bryn Mawr, and a socialite with literary ambitions. Yet beneath the polished veneer of high society, there were currents of dissatisfaction and hidden complexities that would only surface after she vanished. The timeline of that morning is preserved with an almost cinematic precision, which makes the subsequent void all the more jarring. Around 11 in the morning, Dorothy left her family home. Her room was left in its usual state, offering no clue that she did not intend to return. She was dressed impeccably, as was her custom. She wore a tailored suit of blue serge, a long blue coat, and a large black velvet hat lined with pale blue Alice, adorned with 2 artificial roses. She carried a sizable muff of fox fur, which concealed a small amount of cash, approximately $25 to $30. As she prepared to leave, her mother, Mary Arnold, offered to accompany her. It was a common practice for women of their social standing to shop in pairs, providing both companionship and propriety. However, Dorothy declined the offer. She stated she intended to do some shopping for a masquerade gown and simply wished to walk. This decision to go alone was the first tumblers clicking into place for the mystery that followed. Mary Arnold watched her daughter walk out the door, never suspecting that the heavy wooden entrance of their brownstone was closing on Dorothy for the final time. Dorothy walked west toward Fifth Avenue. Her movements were deliberate and traceable, painting a portrait of a woman engaged in the mundane errands of a life of leisure. Her first stop was at the confectionery shop of Park and Tilford, located at 5th Avenue and 59th Street. Witnesses remembered her demeanor as cheerful and entirely ordinary. She purchased a half-pound box of chocolates, charging the item to her family's account. The clerk who served her noted nothing amiss. There was no sign of distress, no furtive glances, nothing to suggest a woman planning an escape or fearing for her safety. From the confectioner, she continued her walk down 5th Avenue. The streets were crowded with shoppers and carriages, the bustle of the city providing a backdrop of anonymity. She entered Brentano's bookstore on 27th Street Here, the trail becomes more specific and somewhat curious. Dorothy purchased a book titled Engaged Girl Sketches, a collection of humorous essays about courtship. Given her own complicated romantic situation, a secret and somewhat turbulent relationship with a man named George Griscom Jr., the purchase invites speculation, yet offers no concrete answers. Was it a gift? Was it for herself? She exchanged pleasantries with the staff, again displaying the easy confidence of a regular patron. It was shortly after leaving the bookstore, around 2 in the afternoon, that Dorothy encountered a friend, Gladys King. This meeting serves as the anchor of the investigation, the final confirmed sighting of Dorothy Arnold by someone who knew her. The 2 women stood on the sidewalk of 5th Avenue amid the afternoon crowds. According to King, Dorothy was in high spirits. They discussed the upcoming debutante party for Dorothy's younger sister, Marjorie. Dorothy spoke of the event with anticipation, referencing the preparations and the guests. The conversation was brief and light-hearted. As they prepared to part ways, King asked Dorothy about her next destination. Dorothy gestured towards Central Park. She famously stated that she intended to walk home through the park to clear her head. The distance was significant, but not unmanageable for a young woman who enjoyed walking. King watched her friend turn and head north, waving a casual goodbye. Dorothy merged into the flow of pedestrians, a splash of blue serge and velvet disappearing into the gray and black coats of the New York crowd. The sun began to set, and the temperature dropped. In the Arnold household, the rhythm of the evening began. Dinner was strictly observed, a time for the family to gather. Francis Arnold, the patriarch, was a man of rigid habits and significant influence. When Dorothy failed to appear for dinner, a ripple of unease moved through the house. It was unlike her to be late without a message. However, in 1910, communication was not instantaneous. A delayed carriage or an extended visit with a friend was a plausible explanation. The family ate dinner, the empty chair serving as a silent point of tension. As the hours ticked past 8, then 9, the unease hardened into genuine worry. The Arnolds began to make discreet inquiries. They telephoned friends Dorothy might have visited, careful to frame the questions as casual checks rather than expressions of panic. No one had seen her. The narrative of her day ended on the pavement of 5th Avenue with Gladys King. By midnight, the silence from Dorothy was deafening. Yet the reaction of the Arnold family was dictated by the social codes of their era. Frances Arnold was terrified of scandal. To have a daughter missing was not just a tragedy. It was a potential blemish on the family name. The fear of public scrutiny paralyzed their initial response. Instead of contacting the authorities immediately, Frances Arnold chose a path of secrecy that would ultimately cripple the chances of finding his daughter. He summoned his friend and lawyer, John S. Keith, to the house. Together, they debated the possibilities. Had she been taken against her will? Had she suffered a medical episode and been taken to a hospital anonymously? Or the most scandalous possibility, had she run away with a man? The family knew of her contact with George Griscom Jr., a man Frances Arnold strongly disapproved of. The suspicion that she might have eloped took root, providing a hopeful, albeit embarrassing, alternative to a fatal incident. For the next several weeks, the search for Dorothy Arnold was a shadow operation. Frances Arnold hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, keeping the New York Police Department completely in the dark. Private investigators fanned out across the city, checking hospitals, holding centers, and transportation hubs. They moved quietly, showing Dorothy's photograph to nurses and clerks, always with the caveat of discretion. They searched the hospitals not just for the living, but for those who had lost their lives in accidents, checking descriptions against the unidentified individuals in the city morgues. Every lead dissolved into mist. The investigators also targeted George Griscom Jr. He was in Italy at the time, residing with his parents in Florence. This geographical distance seemed to provide him with an alibi. Yet the family needed certainty. A telegram was sent. Griscom's response was one of confusion and concern. He knew nothing of her whereabouts. To verify this, Frances Arnold and his wife eventually traveled to Europe to confront him personally. A desperate journey that yielded nothing, but the realization that if Dorothy had vanished, she had not done so to be with her lover. Back in New York, the Pinkertons inspected the physical evidence left behind. Her room revealed nothing. No clothes were missing aside from what she wore. Her jewelry was accounted for. Her passport was still in her desk. The $25 she carried was enough for a train ticket or a few nights in a hotel, but hardly enough to sustain a new life. The utter lack of preparation suggested that whatever happened to her was sudden and unplanned. 6 weeks passed. The silence remained unbroken. There were no ransom notes, no letters of explanation, and no sightings that withstood scrutiny. The pressure on Frances Arnold became unbearable. The private resources were exhausted, and the rumor mill was beginning to churn. He realized that the strategy of containment had failed. He had traded the critical golden hours of the investigation for privacy, and now he had neither. Finally, in late January of 1911, Frances Arnold invited the press to his home. He stood before the reporters, a man broken by uncertainty, and announced that his daughter was missing. He provided the description of her blue serge suit and the Alice blue lining of her hat. he offered a reward of $1,000, a significant sum for the time. The police were furious at the delay. Police officials publicly criticized the family for withholding information, noting that the trail was now cold. The physical evidence on the streets of New York had been washed away by weeks of winter weather. Potential witnesses had forgotten the faces they passed 6 weeks prior. The incident had transitioned from an active emergency to a cold mystery before the official investigation had even begun. Theories began to fill the vacuum left by facts. Had she slipped on the ice in Central Park and suffered a fatal injury, her presence concealed by the snow? Had she been the target of a random crime of opportunity? Or had she, feeling the stifling weight of her father's control and the hopelessness of her romance, chosen to orchestrate her own disappearance? The incident of Dorothy Arnold's vanishing is defined not by what was found, but by what was absent. There was no struggle, no witness to a crime, and no trace of the young woman in the blue coat. She walked into the heart of one of the most populous cities on Earth and simply ceased to exist. As the newspapers printed her photograph and the public speculated on her fate, the Arnold family was left with the haunting reality of that December afternoon. A wave goodbye, a promise to walk home, and then absolute silence. The year was 1910, and New York City was a sprawling metropolis of steel, steam, and rigid social hierarchies. In the gilded parlors of the upper class, reputation was a currency more valuable than gold, and silence was often the most expensive commodity of all. When Dorothy Arnold, the 25-year-old heiress and aspiring writer, vanished into the crisp December air, the initial reaction from her family was not a public outcry, but a suffocating quiet. This silence stands as the first, and perhaps most significant anomaly in a case riddled with contradictions. It is here, in the strange behavior of those closest to the missing woman, that the investigative thread begins to fray. To understand the anomalies, one must first look at the timeline of the disappearance, or rather, the timeline of the admission that a disappearance had occurred. Dorothy was last seen on December 12th. She walked out of Brentano's bookstore on Fifth Avenue, waved a cheerful goodbye to a friend, and turned toward Central Park. She was never seen again. In a modern context, or even in the context of a standard police investigation of that era, one would expect the alarm to be raised by nightfall. If a young woman of her social standing failed to return for dinner, panic should have set in immediately. Yet the Arnold family did not contact the police that night. They did not contact the police the next day, nor the next week. In fact, Francis Arnold, her father, and a formidable importer of fine goods, did not report his daughter missing to the authorities for 6 entire weeks. This delay is the foundational crack in the narrative. For 40-odd days, while the trail went cold and memories of potential witnesses faded, the Arnolds maintained a facade of normalcy. They claimed they were conducting a private search to avoid a scandal, fearful that publicity would tarnish Dorothy's name if she had simply run away. However, the intensity of their private actions contradicts the idea of a simple runaway. Francis Arnold hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency almost immediately. He dispatched agents to search hospitals, morgues, and passenger lists of ships bound for Europe. The family knew deep down that something catastrophic had occurred, yet they chose to prioritize social standing over the resources of the New York City Police Department. This decision suggests a fear not just of scandal, but of what might be uncovered if the authorities looked too closely at Dorothy's life. The second anomaly lies within the investigation of Dorothy's room. When the family finally admitted she was gone, they claimed her room offered no clues. However, reports surfaced later that evidenced a frantic purging of her personal effects. It was said that papers had been burned in the grate of her fireplace. The nature of these documents remains a mystery, but the act of destroying them points to a deliberate attempt to curate the narrative of her life. If she had been taken against her will, why would her family destroy potential evidence? If she had left of her own accord, what was in those papers that her father was so desperate to hide? The smoke from those burnt letters hangs over the case, obscuring the true state of Dorothy's mind in the days leading up to her disappearance. Then there is the matter of George Griscom Jr. He was a man the Arnold family viewed with disdain, a 42-year-old engineer from a wealthy Pittsburgh family, whom Dorothy had been seeing in secret. He was the anomaly in her otherwise scripted life. When the Pinkertons finally tracked Griscom down in Italy, where he was vacationing with his parents, he claimed total ignorance of her whereabouts. He produced a letter from Dorothy, written shortly before she vanished, which expressed high spirits and discussed an upcoming issue of a literary magazine. It did not read like the final words of someone planning to end their own existence or vanish voluntarily. However, the history between Dorothy and Griscom revealed a deviation from the innocent debutante image the Arnolds tried to project. Investigators discovered that months prior, Dorothy had pawned almost $500 worth of jewelry to finance a week-long trip to Boston with Griscom. She had told her family she was visiting a friend from college. This deception proved she was capable of leading a double life. But the anomaly here is not just the affair, but the money. At the time of her disappearance, she had very little cash on her person, perhaps only $20 or $30. If she intended to run away with Griscom or anyone else, she would have needed funds. She had access to money, yet she took none of it. she left behind her clothing, her jewelry, and her passport. This lack of preparation strongly refutes the theory of a planned elopement, leaving us with darker possibilities. The theories that arose to fill the void of evidence constitute their own set of anomalies. One prevalent rumor, whispered in the parlors of New York society, was that Dorothy had become pregnant during her illicit romance and had sought a medical procedure to resolve the situation. In 1910, such procedures were illegal and highly dangerous, often performed in clandestine locations. The theory posits that the procedure went wrong, resulting in a fatal incident, and that her remains were disposed of to protect the practitioner and the reputation of everyone involved. This theory gains traction when one examines the behavior of the family's attorneys. There were reports that the Arnold family lawyer had spent weeks interrogating managers of underground clinics in Pittsburgh and New York. Why would they focus so heavily on this specific avenue if they believed she was merely hiding? It suggests they suspected a medical crisis. There was even a specific rumor about a house in the suburbs of Pittsburgh where it was alleged a young woman matching Dorothy's description had lost her life during an operation and was subsequently incinerated in a furnace. While never proven, the persistence of this story and the fact that the family investigated it indicates they believed her secret life had led to a tragic end. Perhaps the most chilling anomaly is the attitude of Francis Arnold himself. As the weeks turned into months, his demeanor shifted from anxious father to a man resigned to a grim certainty. He famously told the press that he believed his daughter was no longer alive. He stated that she had been attacked in Central Park, and her life ended there. Despite the complete lack of physical evidence or witnesses in the middle of the day in a busy public space, his insistence on this theory felt like an attempt to close the book, to stop the questions. At one point, he made a comment that haunts the case to this day. When asked if she might still be in hiding, he replied that she was in a safe place, suggesting a finality that precluded any return. He even spent thousands of dollars excavating the cellar of a house in Poughkeepsie based on a tip, a desperate act that seemed to contradict his public stance that she died in the park. This oscillation between total resignation and frantic searching suggests a man who knew more than he was saying, or a man driven to the brink of madness by not knowing anything at all. There is also the peculiar detail of the chocolate. On the day she vanished, Dorothy bought a box of chocolates, ostensibly to share with her family after dinner. This mundane purchase is an anomaly because it speaks to her intent to return home. A person planning to disappear forever rarely stops to buy confections for a future they do not intend to inhabit. A person planning to take their own life does not typically make casual purchases moments before the act. The chocolates represent a future that was abruptly severed. They are a testament to the suddenness of the event. Whatever happened to Dorothy Arnold happened quickly, without warning, and likely against her will. The investigation also uncovered that the Arnold family received multiple ransom notes and letters from cranks claiming to be Dorothy. This is standard in high-profile cases, but the anomaly lies in how quickly these were dismissed. The family seemed entirely uninterested in the possibility of kidnapping. In an era where heiresses were prime targets for ransom, their refusal to entertain this notion suggests they knew that money was not the motive. They were looking for a reason that was personal, emotional, or medical, not financial. As the years passed, the silence that began the case ultimately consumed it. Frances Arnold spent nearly $250,000 on the search, a fortune in those days. Yet, he eventually stopped talking about her entirely. By the time of his own passing, he had removed her name from his will, stating that he was satisfied she was no longer living. This legal erasure is the final anomaly. It was a bureaucratic death certificate signed without a body, a closure forced upon a narrative that had no ending. The disappearance of Dorothy Arnold is not just a story of a missing woman. It is a story of what happens when the desire for privacy collides with the necessity of truth. The anomalies, the 6-week silence, the burnt papers, the secret romance, the rumors of a medical tragedy, and the father's grim resignation paint a picture of a tragedy compounded by social pressure. We are left with the image of a young woman walking into the park, clutching a book and a box of chocolates, stepping out of history and into the realm of eternal speculation. The city moved on, the noise of the streets returned, but the silence the Arnolds created around their daughter remains unbroken. A century-long quiet that hides the truth of what transpired on that cold December afternoon. The investigation into the vanishing of Dorothy Arnold quickly transformed from a private family matter into a chaotic sprawl of false leads, dead ends, and hushed rumors that stretched from the frozen streets of Manhattan to the sun-drenched coast of Italy. Once the Arnold family finally involved the police, weeks after Dorothy walked out of her home on East 79th Street, the trail had not just gone cold. It had been trampled by the passage of time and the secrecy insisted upon by her father, Frances Arnold. What followed was a series of investigative avenues that promised answers, but delivered only frustration, deepening the mystery of how a prominent heiress could simply cease to exist in the middle of a crowded city. The first and most prominent avenue of inquiry led directly to George Griscom Jr., the man with whom Dorothy had been conducting a clandestine correspondence. To the conservative Arnold family, Griscom was an unsuitable match. A man of 42 who still lived with his parents and lacked a serious profession. Yet he was the focal point of Dorothy's hidden life. When the private investigators from the Pinkerton National Detective Agency first examined Dorothy's room, they found letters indicating she had been in contact with Griscom shortly before her disappearance. The theory was simple. Perhaps the two had eloped, fleeing the judgment of New York society for a life of romantic exile in Europe. This theory, however, hit an immediate wall. Griscom was not in New York. He was thousands of miles away in Naples, Italy, vacationing with his parents. The timeline did not align for a spontaneous elopement unless Dorothy had traveled alone to meet him, a journey that would have required a passport and luggage, neither of which she had taken. Desperate for answers, Dorothy's brother John and her mother traveled across the Atlantic to confront Griscom. The meeting was tense and fraught with emotional undercurrents. Griscom, by all accounts, appeared genuinely shocked by the news. He insisted he knew nothing of her whereabouts and had been waiting for a letter from her that never arrived. He provided the family with the last communication he had received, a packet of letters that revealed a woman deeply unhappy with the constraints of her life, but gave no indication of a specific plan to vanish on that particular December day. The exhaustive interrogation of Griscom yielded nothing actionable. He had an ironclad alibi, and his distress seemed authentic. The man the Arnolds hoped would be the key to the puzzle turned out to be just another dead end, leaving the family to return to New York with nothing but grief. With the romantic escape theory losing traction, the investigation turned toward darker possibilities, specifically the rumors circulating through the whispered networks of New York society. One prevailing theory suggested that Dorothy had become pregnant and sought out a medical procedure that was illegal and highly dangerous at the time. In 1910, such matters were handled in the shadows, often with fatal consequences. This lead pointed investigators toward a house in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which had been raided by police months after Dorothy vanished. The residence was suspected of operating as a clinic for such illicit procedures. A story emerged from the raid that chilled the investigators. It was alleged that a woman fitting Dorothy's description had visited the house, and that complications had arisen during her stay. According to this grim narrative, the individual passed away during the procedure, and those responsible, terrified of the legal repercussions and the high-profile nature of their client, had taken drastic measures to conceal the event. There were whispers that the individual had been incinerated to destroy all evidence. However, when the police and private detectives scoured the records and interrogated the operators of the house, the physical descriptions did not match Dorothy's distinct appearance. The timing was off by several weeks, and no personal effects belonging to the heiress were ever recovered from the premises. While the theory of a fatal medical incident remained a persistent rumor that the public refused to let go of, it lacked the evidentiary spine to stand up in a court of law or to provide the Arnolds with closure. It was a narrative that fit the societal fears of the era, but failed to fit the facts of the case. Simultaneously, the investigators had to contend with the flood of false sightings and extortion attempts that inevitably follow a high-profile disappearance. In the months following the public announcement, Frances Arnold received numerous letters claiming that Dorothy was being held against her will. One particularly cruel hoax involved a postcard postmarked from New York City, written in a hand that vaguely resembled Dorothy's, claiming she was safe and would return soon. Experts quickly dismissed it as a forgery, likely created by someone seeking a moment of attention or hoping to extract money from a desperate father. Another letter demanded a ransom of $5,000, a significant sum at the time. The police set up a sting operation, waiting for the extortionist to make contact, but the trail dissolved into silence. It became clear that these were the works of opportunists preying on the family's vulnerability rather than genuine leads. The geography of New York City itself became a subject of intense scrutiny, specifically the vast expanse of Central Park. On the day she vanished, Dorothy had mentioned to an acquaintance that she might walk home through the park. This seemingly innocuous detail led to a massive search operation. The reservoirs were dragged, and the wooded areas were combed by officers and volunteers. The winter of 1910 was bitter, and the ground was frozen hard, making the search difficult. The theory here was one of random misfortune, that she had been accosted by a stranger, or had slipped and fallen into the icy waters of the reservoir. Yet, despite the meticulous dredging and the hours spent scanning the park, not a single trace of Dorothy was found. No hat, no muff, no piece of jewelry. It was as if she had dissolved into the winter air before even reaching the park's entrance. Perhaps the most unsettling dead end was the one that pointed back to the family itself. As the external leads dried up, speculation turned inward. Frances Arnold's behavior during the early days of the investigation, his refusal to call the police for 6 weeks, his insistence on handling matters through private attorneys, fueled rumors that the family knew more than they were saying. A theory gained traction that Dorothy had not died and had not run away, but had been institutionalized. The stigma of a scandalous pregnancy or a mental breakdown was so severe in Edwardian society that some believed a family of the Arnold standing might choose to hide their daughter in a sanitarium in Europe, or the American West, rather than face the public shame. Journalists chased this ghost relentlessly. They checked the registers of private asylums and contacted clinics in Switzerland and Germany. Every time a wealthy American woman was rumored to be staying in a secluded facility, the press would descend, asking if it was Dorothy. In every instance, the lead proved false. There was no paper trail, no admission records, and no credible witness testimony to support the idea that she was living out her days behind the high walls of an institution. Frances Arnold vehemently denied these accusations, spending a fortune to find her, which argued against the idea that he had hidden her away. Yet the secrecy of the initial weeks left a stain of doubt that the investigation could never fully scrub away. Even the spiritual world offered no solace. Desperate for any direction, the public, and arguably some on the periphery of the investigation, turned to clairvoyance and mediums. Seances were held, and psychics claimed to have visions of Dorothy in various states of distress or hiding. One vision placed her in a cellar in a specific neighborhood in New York. Another claimed she was on a ship bound for South America. Police, having exhausted logical leads, would occasionally follow up on these supernatural tips, digging up basements or checking passenger manifests, only to find nothing. These avenues were the last resort of a hopeless investigation, the final thrashing against the reality that she was gone. By the end of 1911, the active investigation had effectively stalled. The Pinkerton detectives, the New York City police, and the amateur sleuths had chased down every lover, every clinic, every ransom note, and every rumor. They had traveled to Italy and back, dragged the depths of the city's waters, and exposed the private lives of the social elite. Yet they were no closer to the truth than they had been on the evening of December 12th, 1910. The disappearance of Dorothy Arnold had become a collection of dead ends, a labyrinth with no center. The father who had once commanded the search was left with a depleted fortune and a broken spirit, famously concluding that his daughter had met a fatal end on the very day she vanished. A belief born not of evidence, but of the crushing silence that had answered his every call. The case remained open on the books, but in reality, it had faded into the gray fog of unsolved history, leaving behind only questions that would echo for more than a century. The winter air on Fifth Avenue in 1910 was biting, carrying the distinct chill of a New York December. It was a time of cobblestones and carriages, of heavy wool coats, and the rigid social structures of the Gilded Age. Amidst the bustling crowds of holiday shoppers, a young woman named Dorothy Arnold walked with a purpose that betrayed no hint of the enigma she was about to become. She was 25 years old, a wealthy heiress with literary aspirations, and a seemingly bright future ahead. Yet, somewhere between the fashionable storefronts and the entrance to Central Park, the signal of her life simply stopped transmitting. Or rather, it changed frequency, turning from a clear broadcast of a privileged existence into a static-filled mystery that has lingered for over a century. To understand the weight of the silence that followed, one must first look at the noise of that final day. It was December 12th. Dorothy left her family home on East 79th Street, dressed in a tailored blue serge suit, a velvet hat lined with blue, and carrying a large muff of fox fur. She told her mother she was going to buy a dress for her sister's debutante ball, a social event that anchored the season. This detail is crucial because it suggests a future-oriented mindset. People planning to vanish rarely concern themselves with formal wear for family gatherings scheduled weeks in advance. Her demeanor was described by everyone who saw her as cheerful and spirited. She walked to a confectionery shop and purchased a box of chocolates. She visited a bookstore, Brentano's, on Fifth Avenue, where she bought a book of essays titled Engaged Girl Sketches. The irony of the title would later fuel endless speculation. But at the moment, it was merely a purchase by a young woman interested in writing. Outside the bookstore, she ran into a friend, Gladys King. They spoke briefly about the upcoming party. King recalled that Dorothy seemed perfectly normal, waving a cheerful goodbye before turning to walk through Central Park. That wave was the last verified communication Dorothy Arnold ever made to her social circle. She was never seen by anyone who knew her again. The initial reaction of the Arnold family is perhaps the most perplexing aspect of the entire case, creating a delay that allowed the trail to grow inextricably cold. When Dorothy failed to return for dinner, panic did not immediately set in, but unease certainly did. However, instead of alerting the authorities, her father, Francis Arnold, a wealthy importer, chose a path of absolute discretion. In the high society of 1910, scandal was viewed with almost as much dread as the loss of life itself. The fear that Dorothy might have run off with a man or simply suffered a lapse in judgment paralyzed the family from seeking public help. For 6 long weeks, the Arnold family kept the disappearance a secret. They hired private investigators, specifically the Pinkertons, to conduct a quiet search. These agents scoured the city, checking hospitals and morgues, but they were instructed to be ghosts, asking questions without revealing who they were looking for or why. This period of silence is the dark void where the truth likely vanished. During these 42 days, any witnesses who might have seen a young woman in a blue coat entering a carriage or walking with a stranger forgot the details. The visual memory of the city faded, replaced by the daily grind of the metropolis. By the time Francis Arnold finally held a press conference to announce his daughter was missing, the trail was not just cold, it was frozen. The investigation that followed the public announcement was chaotic and fueled by sensational journalism. The press, starved for a scandal involving the elite, latched onto every rumor. The primary theory that emerged focused on George Griscom Jr., a man with whom Dorothy had been maintaining a clandestine correspondence. Griscom was 42, living with his parents, and was generally regarded by Francis Arnold as unsuitable for his daughter. The two had met while Dorothy was at Bryn Mawr College and had stayed in contact despite her father's disapproval. Investigators discovered that Dorothy had pawned some jewelry shortly before her disappearance, raising the possibility that she was gathering funds for an escape. The narrative seemed to fit the classic trope of forbidden love. The public waited with bated breath for the news that Dorothy and George had been found in a romantic exile in Europe. However, when Griscom was located in Italy, he appeared genuinely confused and distressed by the news. He produced a letter Dorothy had written to him shortly before she vanished, in which she discussed her writing and mundane daily events. There was no mention of elopement, no goodbye, and no plan. Griscom had no alibi for the exact moment she disappeared, but he was thousands of miles away, and despite intense scrutiny, no evidence ever linked him to her physical removal from New York. As the romantic runaway theory began to crumble, darker possibilities began to fill the vacuum. The lingering signal of the mystery shifted from a love story to something far more sinister. The family and the private investigators began to consider that Dorothy had not left of her own volition, or if she had, the destination was not a new life, but a tragic end. One prevalent theory involved a medical procedure. In the early 20th century, options for women facing unwanted pregnancies were dangerous and illicit. While there was no concrete proof Dorothy was with child, her secret relationship with Griscom provided a plausible context for such speculation. During the investigation, rumors swirled about a private clinic or a house where such procedures were performed. Several locations were raided or investigated in the years following, including a specific house in Pennsylvania that was searched extensively. Investigators looked for any sign that the individual had been there, searching the grounds and the structure itself. They found nothing conclusive. No personal effects, no physical evidence, nothing to link the heiress to the location. This theory implies a tragic accident followed by a cover-up. If Dorothy had sought medical help and the procedure had gone wrong, causing a fatal outcome, those involved would have had a strong motivation to ensure she was never found. In this scenario, the silence of the city swallowed her whole. The bustling nature of New York with its endless construction and shifting landscapes, offered countless places where a person could remain hidden forever. Francis Arnold eventually came to a heartbreaking conclusion. He spent a fortune on the search, effectively draining the family finances. But within a year or two, he publicly stated that he believed his daughter was no longer alive. He suggested that she had been the target of a random act of violence while walking through the park, a fatal incident that ended her life swiftly. He theorized that her form was concealed in the reservoir or buried in a location that would never be disturbed. This acceptance was a shield, a way to close the door on the endless, agonizing hope that she might walk through the front door again. Her mother, however, never gave up. She kept the porch light on for years, convinced that Dorothy had suffered a loss of memory or was being held against her will and would eventually find her way home. This division in the family mirrored the division in the public perception. Some saw a tragic crime. Others saw a woman who had successfully orchestrated her own disappearance to escape the stifling constraints of her social class. There were false sightings, of course. For decades, people reported seeing Dorothy Arnold in various parts of the world. A woman in a convent in Canada, a nurse in the Midwest, a recluse in the South. Each lead was chased down, and each one unraveled upon closer inspection. The signal was essentially an echo, bouncing off the walls of the public imagination, distorting with every repetition. What remains most unsettling about the Dorothy Arnold case is the absolute lack of physical trace. The blue coat, the fox fur muff, the book of essays, the box of chocolates, none of these items ever surfaced. Usually, in cases of a fatal incident or an accident, some debris of the person remains. A piece of clothing found in the woods, a piece of jewelry pawned years later by a stranger. But in this case, it was as if she had stepped through a tear in reality. The lingering signal of Dorothy Arnold is not just about a missing woman. It is a testament to the fragility of existence. It demonstrates how a person, deeply embedded in a network of family, friends, and social standing, can be subtracted from the equation of the world in an instant. The cobblestones of Fifth Avenue offered no testimony. The winter wind carried no voice. Even today, looking back through the archives, the image of Dorothy waving to Gladys King outside the bookstore possesses a haunting finality. It is the last frame of a film that burned in the projector. We are left only with the white screen of the aftermath. The theories, the botched medical procedure, the random attack, the secret life are merely attempts to fill that blank space with logic. But reality, as this case proves, is under no obligation to be logical. The case was never officially closed, though the active investigation ceased long ago. The files gather dust, the ink fades, and the people who knew her have all since passed away. Yet the story persists. It persists because the lack of an ending is psychologically unbearable. We require resolution. We need to know that the signal was received somewhere. But for Dorothy Arnold, the broadcast continues to loop. A distress call from 1910 that has never been answered, fading slowly into the static of history, leaving us only with the questions and the cold, indifferent silence of a December afternoon in New York.